Well, happy Quinquagesima Sunday. Uh-oh, the pastor's gone to speaking in tongues. You mean you didn't know that today had a special name among church circles? Quinquagesima? Or Gesundheit, right? Any guesses as to what that might mean? What you think? Transfiguration? No, close. It's the Latin word for 50. Because we're 50 days away from Easter. How about that? It's a helpful word for us to remember as we head into the Lenten season. Starting on Wednesday, we're going to begin our Lenten fasts. Cutting out some food or a meal or some social media or some other electronic appetite in order that we might make a little bit more room for God in our life, in our daily life, in our lives, period. Fasting becomes this way of creating an empty space within us and inviting God to fill that. By the way, several in the clergy, community clergy group, we'll be doing the Ashes to Go at Starbucks again, like we've done for about 4 or 5 years now. So if you're out and about and you would like to be marked with the Ashes of Ash Wednesday before our Wednesday night service, if you can't make it Wednesday night and you would still like to wear the ashes during the day, you can swing by Starbucks, get a cup of Joe and some Ashes to Go, and you'll be all set. And I realize that some of you may be planning for a special Valentine's Day dinner. And what better way to say I love you than to have a big smudge on your forehead and neither of you try to wipe it off of each other. Try not to change each other, and it will give your waiter and other people in the restaurant lots of things to talk about. So anyway, that's coming up this Wednesday. We do some pretty strange things in church, don't we? I mean, think about it. You walk around with ashes on your forehead. We use strange words like Quinquagesima to describe what everybody else thinks is just another Sunday. And reading strange stories like the one that Mark tells us today. Really reads like a script from Stranger Things. A simple hike up the mountain with Jesus, and suddenly everything about him begins to burst with light. His face, his clothing, and then 2 additional people long believed dead show up alive talking with Jesus. And what are we supposed to make of all this? Quinquagesima. Remember, Easter is 50 days away. You see, in Mark's gospel, he doesn't give us an actual visit by Jesus, the resurrected Jesus. This is as close to the resurrected Jesus as you're going to get in Mark's gospel. He gives us a preview of Easter. He gives us this vision, this high, holy moment of light and splendor, because it's the image that we're supposed to carry with us during this journey toward the cross. We take this strange word and we take this strange story in order to give us hope, in order to remind us that God's light and love will find a way to break out and break into our world and our lives when we least expect it, but when we most need it. Which makes this story a little more normal than it first appears. Because we've also had times when in the midst of doing something ordinary, the light of God's presence suddenly floods over us and leaves us speechless and full of awe and wonder. It's what happened with the people who accompanied Jesus, Peter, James, and John. Mark tells us 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. And as the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed. It was changed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. And just when we think it's one thing, it's a Tide ad. Susan put that back in my mind this morning. So if you watch the Super Bowl, you know what I'm talking about. If you didn't watch the Super Bowl, There's no time to explain. So, 6 days. If you go back in Mark's gospel, 6 days earlier, Jesus told them about the dark shadows of the cross that were already starting to cast its shadow over his path. 6 days after saying those things about dark events that would unfold, he took them to a place to help them see beyond the darkness. We need greatness. We need grandeur, and we need majesty, and we need mystery to remind us that there are greater things than our circumstances. Because when we're mired down in our circumstances, we can't imagine there's anything greater than the difficulty that we're in, the loss that we're experiencing, the hardship that has fallen upon us, the suffering that we do not feel that we deserve and we don't know how to avoid. We need those moments of grandeur and mystery to remind us that life is still full of wonder and possibilities, even in the midst of great difficulty and of great disappointment. Those are the places that lift us up, that give us perspective, that inspire us, that remind us that there really is a power at work in us and around us for good, for beauty, even if our circumstances would tell us otherwise. This past week I came across some pictures. They're taken by a Dutch pilot. He's been flying for, I think the article said, about 20 years now. Started off as a young 20-year-old flying and soon gravitated up, the youngest pilot to fly a 747. He's flying cargo planes. Long distance flights, and he began snapping pictures from the cockpit. And he has captured some spectacular moments, like this first one. This is St. Elmo's fire flashing all around the cockpit while they're flying. Here's just a few others. I'll just let you kind of take a look at them. That, by the way, is the airstrip leading into Kabul, Afghanistan. One of the places that he said has become one of his favorites because of the beauty of that spot. The psalmist says, "I lift up mine eyes to the hills. Where will my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth." You see, we need those pictures of grandeur to remind us that there is something much more permanent, something greater that has fashioned this wonderful world that we live in. And it's still at work for us, with us, around us. Where are the places and the sights and the sounds that cause you to lift your eyes in hope and trust that this power is at work in your life, that it's at work in our world? Keep your eyes and heart open this week, open this Lenten season, and allow that light to reach you and fill you anew with wonder and with hope. And you'll see the light of God breaking through. Now, sometimes light has to come from over us, from something beyond us, but sometimes it just comes from the people who are around us. It takes a more human form. The scripture tells us that 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. And then as they were there, Moses and Elijah appeared also. We see this trio, Peter, James, and John, often. They accompany Jesus on some of his most intimate experiences. They're the three that Jesus chooses to take with him when he lifts a young child who has died and restores her to life and to the love of her parents and her community. They're the three that Jesus invites to go to the garden with him and go a little deeper, away from the others, and watch as he prays. Stay with him while he prays. Be his companions and his trusted support. And then hear. The other disciples, the other 9, don't get invited on this journey. We don't know why. It's not that Jesus loved these 3 more than the others. But I do think there are times that there are certain people who help us see light better than others. That light happens around us because they're around us. They just help us see things better, help us experience things better. Maybe that was true with Peter, James, and John. They had been with him from the very beginning. He knew them perhaps best. This past week, I received an e-newsletter from Matt and Michelle Norman. Matt and Michelle were members of my previous congregation. Right about the same time that I was leaving there, they were also leaving to go overseas to work in Barcelona, Catalonia, if you've been watching the news of late, and that region of Spain, or Independence, whichever one you want to listen to. But anyway, they've been over there a couple of years, and they send out updates about their work and some of the ministry that they're doing. And they told this wonderful story. Since October, there's been a young woman who has been part of a student missions program. She's either in college or has just finished college. And so she has come to work with them in Barcelona. And this ministry started, she came in October, and she said just about a week or 2 before she got there, they started this ministry where they were feeding the homeless in Barcelona every Monday and Thursday evenings. Volunteers would come, they would literally cook the food and prepare it, open the doors, and invite the homeless to come in and share a meal. She said since Christmas and New Year's this year fell on Mondays, they wanted to do very special things for the holidays. So on Christmas, they did a very elaborate dinner, had great turnout, decided that they probably thought New Year's Day would be equally large, so they put out a call, asked for a bunch of extra volunteers and food. People came and cooked, and they were expecting quite a few of the homeless. She said a new volunteer came. Her name was Maria. She just had this infectious kind of personality, joyful, full of laughter. She said she was the kind of person that you meet her and you cannot forget her. She just had all of this joy. She said we'd opened the doors at 8 p.m. and about 30 minutes after we opened the doors, in came a homeless man who was dressed, she said, in clothes that were obviously inappropriate for the cold weather. He took a bowl of soup, sat down at a table. She said, I didn't think much about that after that moment until I heard this voice from across the room exclaim, Hermano! Brother. It was the voice of Maria. She said, the next thing I knew, she was collapsed on top of this man's shoulders, weeping uncontrollably. It was her own brother. Estranged because of an alcohol substance abuse issue for 3 years. And on New Year's Day, he stumbles into their soup kitchen on the very day that Maria's there. Elise writes that all she could think of was the story of the prodigal son. They talked with her brother, got him into an alcohol rehab program. And I thought the light of God shining through the love of people, the care and compassion that happens. If you're like me, you've been fascinated by the Olympics. Great stories, great events, the pageantry of those opening ceremonies. Talk about an awesome thing. All of those drones, 1,400 of them forming a dove and all kinds of other things. I thought about Zeke, thinking that he would love to be out there flying his drone. incredible skating and snowboarding and the beautiful backstories of some of the athletes. Vicki and I have both been taken by the backstory of speed skater Mayami Biney, 17-year-old dynamo. She's listed as coming from Reston, Virginia, but she was born in Ghana. Born in Ghana, relocated to Virginia with her father, initially tried ice skating, to be a skate dancer and all of that, but somebody quickly said she was way too fast to be a skater. She needed to be a speed skater. So she quickly switched gears and got on the radar of all the Olympic coaches because she was just phenomenal. Well, what struck me was an interview that NBC conducted with her father the other night, talking about their journey and how she really needed to be in a place where she could get better training, where she would have access to all that the Olympic training provided, and that would require them to move. And he said, out of the blue, family from Utah opened their house for both Mayami and her father to come and live with them so that she could get that additional coaching, not have to worry about living expenses, just open their home. And as they're interviewing him, he just weeps, thinking about the beauty of the light of love and generosity that flowed from those strangers. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross writes, people are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed by the light that is within. Who are the people who bring you light? How could this Lenten season be a time to spend some time in their presence, to allow the light of God through them to shine on you? And who brings out the light in you? Keep your eyes open, because chances are God will use one of them, maybe even you, to show up and bring light. And then there's a third place that I think God's light shines. Mark writes at the end of this fantastic story, a voice came from the cloud and said, "This is my dearly loved son. Listen to him." A few years ago, a colleague and friend of mine, Greg Hunt, published a book. The title of the book is called Blackbirds Singing in the Dead of Night. You may recognize it as a Beatles lyric. Greg was, in many ways, at the start of that project, kind of at the zenith of his ministry. And he said, and suddenly, God went silent. He said, I couldn't explain it, couldn't understand it. And the more I prayed, the less I heard. So he said, I decided that I would do something different. He took his Bible. How many of you have a version of the Bible where all the words of Jesus are in red? Call it the Red Letter Bible. He took all of those passages, just the words of Jesus, pulled them all together, and every day began reading just a section of just the words of Jesus. The book, Blackbirds Singing in the Dead of Night, is a compilation of 40 of those passages and his journal reflections. A fraction, 1/5, of the 200 journal reflections that he had on 200 passages of the words of Jesus. And he said, listening to the words of Jesus, just the words of Jesus, finally led him back into some light. Gave him clarity about the next steps of his career, part of which was to leave the pastorate and begin doing more writing, which he has done since, Blackbird being one of the first projects that he undertook. I mentioned that because it was in Greg's home after a tumultuous time at my previous church that I put the final touch on my resignation letter. Because I was in the presence of somebody who had already been in the dark night of the soul. And through the words of Jesus, he helped me find the light. What passages would you choose? What passages already bring you light? And in those difficult times, how can you assemble them in a way that you can gain access to them and listen to them deeply? How might Lent become a time for you to take those passages of Scripture and listen profoundly to what they're saying to you? Just to listen to the voice of God speak just to you. It's with the light of that mountaintop encounter still shining on their path that Jesus and Peter and James and John go back down the mountain. Because after all, isn't that where we most need the light? And it will shine on them until the light will go out on a Friday afternoon when fate will bring them to a craggy hillside, and they will watch as the powers that be will snuff out the last light of Jesus. But if you follow Mark's story, you will see that as that day grows darker and darker, the life of Jesus grows more luminous. He will offer forgiveness to his captors and to his crucifiers. He will offer hope to his fellow crossmates. And he will shout down the darkness of death with a cry of victory. Mark's gospel tells us that 2 times heaven had to tell us who Jesus was. At his baptism, "You are my beloved Son. With you I'm well pleased." Here on the mountaintop, "This is my beloved Son. Listen." But at the cross, there will be no need for heaven to speak and tell us who Jesus is. Because the way he lives and the way he dies, it becomes so obvious to us that even the captain of the guard can voice what heaven always has known. Surely, this was the Son of God. That's who walks with us. Up the mountain and down the mountain and in the valleys in between those high and low moments of our lives. And no matter where we walk, he is the light that shines in the darkness. And there is not a darkness yet that can overcome it. Thanks be to God.